Welcome to Wealthy Living Podcast. I'm Lisa, your host and founder of Wealthy Living. It is here that I connect with a variety of wonderful humans to have inspiring and insightful conversations to help you live a more meaningful, connected and well life. A place to learn and grow in confidence and clarity, to make choices that support your well-being, both personally and professionally. So today I have a man named Brian Ondrako in with me here. So welcome, Brian.
Lisa, thanks for having me.
Did I say your name right?
Really solid. Yeah, it's Ondrako. That was really good.
Oh, good. So let me tell you a little bit about Brian. So after he'd lived a traditional life path for quite a few years, just doing what, a lot of people do, and that's, finish school and study and get your regular job and have kids, etc. Brian decided a few years ago that he wanted to change his life and make decisions that were a little bit more fulfilling to his whole life. So he started on a journey to take a much deeper look into himself and explorations to what would really fulfill his life. And I think that then became a whole nother journey of all different things that he's done. But I'll let Brian tell you a little bit about that. So Brian, do you want to tell the listeners a little bit about your journey and how you got to where you are?
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, where should I start? But I think the biggest, you kind of summed it up a little bit. The journey starts off pretty simple, like most people, right? Came from a average upbringing in upstate New York here in the U.S., middle class family. I was a middle child, kind of just went through the normal thing. I've realized now with a lot of self-reflection, I was sort of happy as a kid, but not as happy as I'd like to be. And that's probably why I have some different initiatives I want to do going forward to help other people. But just kind of your average, life, if you will. And I kind of was under the blinders that, hey, you go to college, right? And then go start a career and build that up, which is what I did. I used to teach golf for a living. So I was a PJ professional for all those golfers out there listening. Great game, right? Phenomenal game. But I kind of got burnt out in my late 20s teaching golf and, figuring out like, what am I going to do next? What am I passionate about? And really trying to figure out, like, is this what I plan on doing for the next 30 years, right? The whole thing, everyone has that kind of date circled in their calendar. Hey, when I'm 65 years old, I'm going to retire and then run off into the sunset or whatever. And I just had a different perspective on that. I said, there's got to be stuff better out there, because I wasn't that happy at the time. And trust me, I'm a very optimistic and positive person, but I wasn't that happy. So what I started to do, I kind of joking call it my Renaissance period about 5-ish years ago, is to really go back to what I used to do as a kid. And the two big things that as I started to get more self-aware, was I was an extremely curious kid, and I had a phenomenal work ethic. And I can go into that a little bit later if needed. But really the part of that was important is that I started to look at and say, okay, well, in my 20s, I certainly wasn't that curious. I kind of just went with the flow. I kind of each day turned into the next, and I kind of just went along my way. And I certainly did not put the work in that I thought I could do, especially with the golf career. I thought I could have put some more stuff into the business I was running and those type of things. And what I started to realize when I look back at that, I said, you know what, this is an opportunity. Maybe it's a line in the sand that I draw and say, now, how do I look forward the next handful of years and beyond and really carve out a new path for myself? So that's ultimately what I really try to do. So the last 5-ish years has really been this Renaissance period of a tremendous learning, discovering new things, trying new things, tasting new things, and realizing that I wasn't as happy as I should have been in my 20s, but I'm a hell of a lot more fulfilled now at 36 because I went through a lot of those different things and realized there was a lot more to life. I've learned a hell about myself as well along that journey. So I'll stop there for a minute, but that's kind of the difference. There's not an exact point 5 or 6 years ago, but there's several kind of key indicators that led me to kind of where I am today. But
yeah, and I do want to talk a little bit more about where you are today and the things that you're doing. But before I do that, I really want to touch on something you said, and that was about you when you stopped. You really went back to go, well, who was I as a kid? And that's kind of like your actualized self. So what was your actualized self? And I think I'd like to talk and like unpack that a little bit, because I really believe that that is often the starting point for a lot of people when they're stuck and they want to do stuff and they just don't know what it is and how to implement it, or even the things that they're doing, not necessarily changing the career, but looking at it in a different way or bringing more of themselves into it. And to me, that goes back to really connecting back to yourself and your actualized self. So talk to me a little bit about your actualized self. I mean, for you, it was working out that you were curious and that you had a strong work ethic. I mean, the work ethic is something that I don't know if it's born or experienced, but this whole feeling of going back, how do people do that? How do people, at what age do you sort of remember and come back to really discover what it is that is innately you?
Yeah, I mean, at least, I mean, I can speak for myself, or at least folks that I've talked with a lot about this, but I mean, I think the first step is acknowledging that you want to change or you want to understand and unpack it, because it could be difficult, right? Some people go to, therapy for this. Other people just sit, I kind of did it a lot through meditation and really being with my thoughts a lot and figuring it out. Um, so on a positive standpoint, yeah, the curiosity, the work ethic, those things were I unpacked a lot, because I started to look back like, okay, what was I good at as a kid? And I started to realize, like, you know what, when I was 11 years old, I had a paper route. I think back now, I have a 7-year-old son. Like, I can't imagine 4 years him going out and delivering papers and going at 5:30 a.m., walking through the snow behind people's houses. Like, no way, that ain't happening. But I did that because I wanted to get money so I can buy like golf equipment and stuff like that, because I didn't really, have a lot, and it wasn't given a lot by my parents. And at the time, this is going a slight tangent, but I thought that was a bad thing. Now I look back and I'm appreciative of my parents maybe not doing that, because that helped me out, learn a lot. But at the time, I had to go out and kind of get it. And so when I would like deliver papers and I had to go collect money from people when I'm 11, 12, 13, et cetera, I did that for 6 years. Um, that curiosity, I would like go in. This is hilarious. I don't remember I told this story much, but like I remember going like I had an older neighborhood. So let's say everyone was an average of like maybe 60, 65 years old that I would deliver papers to. I remember going and I'd have like an hour-long conversation with these little old ladies, like the nicest, sweetest ladies in the world, but just like asking them questions about their life and what they're doing. And I'm like, what the hell was going on? Why am I doing this? But I started to think back. And so this goes to kind of wrap around, like, as I started to be, kind of get more awareness of like how I was as a kid. Okay, but that's really taken me throughout my life, and I just didn't realize it. Right, as I was in teaching golf, asking questions to students and being curious, not just about their golf game, but their personal life, being able to understand them as who they are. This is why I've been successful in software sales for many years. So I started to uncover, like, wait a minute, you've always been curious, but you just suppressed it for whatever reason or didn't think about it. And so maybe you didn't get the full benefit out of it. Same thing with the work ethic, not only just from working, paper route, but, I used to be a decent golfer. I wish I was better. I wasn't tournament tested. I didn't play a lot of tournaments growing up. And I think that's ultimately what didn't propel me maybe to a higher stage or a bigger stage, if you will. But I used to pound golf balls for 3, 4, 5 hours at a time, which is a lot when you think about it for like a kid. And then even as I got into college, but I always had that grinder mentality where I certainly had athletic ability. I wasn't the most talented, so I had to grind it out of the ground. As Ben Hogan used to say, kind of dig it out of the dirt, right? In terms of you got to keep hitting balls, you got to learn. So again, that work ethic mentality, I had it. I've always had that. And for whatever reason, I don't know why in my 20s, I just got complacent. I can't put any other stamp on it than I just got complacent. So as I started to get out of that mold, I started to look at it and said, wait a minute, Brian, you know that you can put the time in to achieve what you want. Just go ahead and do it. And let's set a high bar for yourself. Let's set some goals and let's actually go out and try to achieve it. And that's really what I've tried to accomplish over the last handful of years. Is like, I love to challenge myself with, even if the dumbest thing that I might think is dumb, like I always trying to challenge myself, whether it's a little CrossFit workout that I'm doing, or it's something bigger of, hey, accomplish this. that work ethic has been huge for me. And I think that's going to help carry me on as I get older. So on to your other point, not to go too long-winded here, but those are like the positives. The negatives that I took out that I really had to reflect on, and this is the harder part, I think, for people to understand, is really be true to, and like, who were you, or how is that impacted? And for me, as a middle child, I don't know how many middle children are out there listening, right? The biggest thing that middle children lack is the attention, because I had an older brother and he got all the attention. My dad, I always said, like, Nick's like driving, or he's, playing a sport or whatever. And then when it came to Brian, I was like, well, I already did that with Nick, like whatever, and then I had my younger sister who's 5 years younger than me. So it was like, the fresh car smell, right? It's like the new baby, and that's our first daughter. So I felt neglected as all get up when I was younger, and probably partly that was on myself, but also that I just didn't feel like I was loved as much, or I didn't have. So as I grew into my adult years, what do you think happened, right? I needed more attention. I was needy. I was always like trying to not be around people. I love being around people, but just like, kind of needing that to solidify who I was as a person. So to kind of go back to what you'd asked, I think the key of reflection is like, where's not only the positive, the good stuff, but where was the heartache? Where was the problem that I had? And that was it. So one of the things I've overcome over the last handful of years is really going back and I kind of use the term, sometimes it sounds selfish, but like self-love, right? Really believing in myself, who I am, that I could be. I don't need to be in a relationship. I don't need to be around people. Like, I can be happy with who I am, what I believe, how I do things, and be positive and optimistic in that way. And that's only going to help my relationships going forward. That has been a really hard pill to swallow, I will tell you that. But I'll tell you what, man, it feels good on the other end, to understand that now, and to not use that as an excuse, but use it kind of as almost leverage to propel me forward.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing all that, because that does give, it does give both views. And there was a lot of things that came to mind when you were speaking. And obviously we kept going, you kept going on to different paths. So I won't be able to address.
Sorry, I go on a lot of tangents. So like I'm all over the place. So
it was great. It was great. And I could, follow you and feel you through that whole process of you speaking. But, that whole idea of, I suppose, really coming back and not necessarily, like you said, having this one pinpointed image, or that a lot of people might do in an inner child meditation or something, where they just see a certain age and a certain personality and a certain way of being. It's actually clues along the way. And when you really go back and have a look, you were this sponge curiosity with even just the old women, and that you obviously loved to have conversations and gain knowledge and wisdom, and continuously wanted to learn from everyone around you. And it wasn't actually about the job of dropping the papers, but it was, you took advantage or opportunities within what you did, and not even realizing it. But, now when you're going back and thinking about how can I live that fulfilled, purpose-filled life, it gave you that opportunity when you're looking back and looking at the actions that you took, looking at the choices that you made as a kid unconsciously.
And what's interesting, if I can add on that, that's a really good point. And what I realized, I've actually been realizing this more lately than even a few years ago, like this is just this past year, is really understanding that actually, it's funny, is like that doing that, it wasn't about me. Like, I had thought it was always like, again, I need attention, I'm doing whatever, but it was actually because I didn't get the attention and I wasn't happy. And I never liked seeing people unhappy because I knew how it felt.
Yeah.
So I think part of it, as I look back, like when like I said, the nice old ladies I talked with, it wasn't about me like, hey, I'm just talking to them, whatever. It's actually, it gave them comfort because they probably didn't talk to people throughout the day as much. So like I was that guiding voice for them, or I could be like a listener. So it almost is like, and that thing that I'm trying to take as my North Star going forward is I'm a helper. And I want to be able to listen and give guidance, or just be there to kind of be a shoulder crying, if you will, because I know how it feels to not be that way, to be unhappy. I don't want that in anyone else. So part of it, like, it's funny when I look back at that, is it's actually me trying to almost give back in a way, you know, in
And
a
the
kind of weird way, I guess. But
And the other thing that it is, which is this reframe that I read a couple of months ago, which I think is one of the most brilliant reframes for attention seeking, and it was to do with children, but I think it can be used for everyone and anything. Instead of seeing someone as an attention seeker, see them as a connection seeker. So they're not vying for attention, they're vying for connection.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, and it's such a good reframe to even, you know, like if you do have kids and, you know, it's like, oh my God, they're just, you know, always wanting attention, and, you know, you think their behavior is really bad, but when you look underneath that, what they're really wanting is connection.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I think you mentioned something other when you're kind of asking that prior question about, you know, one of the things too, and I think what we've all talked about right now so far, it's all about just kind of, you know, again, self-awareness and who you are as a person has nothing to really do with what your job is. And I think that's where, going back to where I love teaching golf. I have people, neighbors, whatever, they want my help, and I still love coaching. But I kind of got burnt out with the sport in terms of that side, in terms of running that business. But when I talk with a lot of folks about is, you know, the thing with it's actually funny. I think, don't you got your retreat with Elizabeth de Gilbert coming up?
Yeah.
That's awesome, by the way.
Yeah.
I watched, she did a soul session with Oprah many years back. I don't know if you saw it, right? But it was around, I think it was called Flight of the Hummingbird. Does this sound familiar?
Mm-hmm.
And I believe it was her, right? If I'm hearing that. Anyways, but I think it was Elizabeth Gilbert that talked about, because this was one thing, because I was lacking, like, oh, what am I passionate about? What am I passionate about? And it was this whole thing where she talks about, like, you might like a lot of things, right? You don't have to be passionate about one thing. That was a big eye opener for me, because I had thought, like, oh my God, it feels like everyone has something they're passionate about. I don't. That's when it really started to open me up to try new things. Let me just try. Let me just see if I like this, that, or the other thing. And that's partly where podcasting came in for me, where I wanted to, you know, start a podcast, and because it's something I always kind of wanted to do. I had a great teacher back. I think a lot of us always had that, maybe one teacher, that one person that believed in us. And I had this one teacher, Mr. Hines, back when I was 18, he just pulled me aside randomly one day and he was like, Brian, you got great pitch and tone. You should be on radio someday. Now, this is back in 2001. Podcast didn't exist then. But so that never left me. And people have said that throughout my life. So as I was gearing up to saying, hey, I love interviewing people. I love the conversations, as we talked about. You know, he said, hey, I got a great voice. Okay, maybe that's something I should do. Hey, podcasting becoming popular. This would be a cool platform. And that's ultimately what led me to kind of podcasting, and which obviously I'm still doing now 2 years later. So it's pretty incredible how, like, you may not know what you like and you may fall into it, but you just got to keep trying things and eventually you may figure it out. And trust me, there's a million other things I like to do. So maybe it's something else I do full time, or, you know, that I invest a lot of my time in down the road. Who knows?
Mm. So what would you say, you know, for people that are sort of living that treadmill, you know, back and forth their life, or the Groundhog Day, and they're not necessarily happy or fulfilled, but they feel like they have a lot of responsibilities. They might have a small family, they might have a mortgage, they might have lots of things, they might be in debt, and they don't feel like they have the choice to go and take that leap of courage to go on a path that feels maybe possibly more fulfilling, but they don't even know if it will be. And so how do you think, or what do you think it takes for somebody to take that leap of going, all right, but I've got a job and it pays the bills and I do all this and I might not love it, but I need to keep going because I have responsibilities?
Well, I mean, I think part of it is having the tough talk with yourself, because I frankly, and trust me, there's probably a lot of people that are worse off, like way worse off, that I'm not even thinking about. But for the average person, right? Maybe that's listening to this podcast. I think that people give themselves too easy of an out. I think we all have the choice. right? And the reason I say that is we all have, I mean, you and I can probably talk. I mean, I remember back, talk 8 years ago, 7 years ago, I was probably $40,000 in debt. Had a job that wasn't paying a lot. I didn't know where I wanted to go with my career. And now I look where I am in 2019 and it's a complete 180. And it's because I decided to make the small incremental choices each day to ultimately lead to the life that I wanted. So it's not easy. It certainly is not. And it's easier for some than it is for others. I respect that. But at the end of the day, I think the biggest thing is to prioritize, right? So, it's kind of like, I'm big into fitness and nutrition. It's like counting calories, right? If you're not in the best shape of your life, or you want to lose, 50 pounds, let's say, or something like that. Well, the first thing you should do is track your calories and track what you're eating. Just do it for a week. I'd love to have you do it for 30 days, but do it for a week. Just track everything you're eating for a week, right? And ultimately, you start painting a very interesting picture about what you're putting in your body that may be attributed to your weight gain. So I often coach people on the same thing for their life. How do you prioritize your family? You talk about a few things there, right? How do you prioritize your family, your friends, your money, your job, whatever? If you're in a lot of debt, well, that may, for a little while, not that you neglect your family, but that may be your number one priority for a little while, for a year or two. So maybe you go and do I don't know if you're, a lot of your listeners know like Dave Ramsey, right? I think he's big around the world, but he had a great book that I read like 10 years ago called The Total Money Makeover, and the debt snowball he talked about. But and I went through that practice, and you're basically eating rice and beans, as he says, like you're not going out to dinner, and you're really cutting it close, but that ultimately leads to the greater life that you want. So I would say, prioritize. This is something, again, I did and I know works, is prioritize what's important for you. So let's say it is getting out of debt. Well, then prioritize, hey, I'm going to go ahead and I'm not going to maybe, Black Friday is coming up here in the US. I'm not going to spend $1,000 because there's great deals out. Maybe I don't need that stuff. Yeah. Maybe I'll sell a few things on eBay. Maybe I'll try to, pare down some of my debt. And then in the future, if I do that, now I have the opportunity to do some other things that I want. Yeah. So that would be the first step. I think the other thing too is not only with the prioritize, let's, however you do it, but also realizing what can you take out that's bad. If you're watching Netflix for 4 hours a night, right? Is that important? If you want to have a better relationship with your family, well, then maybe watch it for an hour and spend a few hours with them. I don't have the answer. I'm not saying it's right or wrong for one person or another. I'm just know that I think a lot of us, because I used to be in this, I used to watch, I'm a big 49ers fan, one of the best teams in the NFL this year, fortunately, but, I used to watch probably not only their games, I used to watch every game. I used to watch 8 or 9 hours of NFL football on Sunday. I don't do that anymore. I'll watch my 49ers. I may watch a game or otherwise here or there, but I just made the choice. I love football, but I made the choice that I want to do some other things. So that was one that I can say, you know what, I can get rid of that most of the time and I could do some other things. So I think a lot of it comes down to the choices that you make each and every day. The little wins ultimately add up to a bigger gain down the road. But if you keep eating cheeseburgers every day and say, well, it's only one day, well, eventually that's going to catch up to you.
Yeah.
So
absolutely. And I think
that's just what I feel. I think we let ourselves off the hook too easy. I think a lot of us, right? And I'm just as guilty as everyone else of yeah, it's only one day, or, hey, yeah, I'll do that next week or whatever. But if you really want to change where you're at today, everyone does have that opportunity. And what's really interesting, and I use the word opportunity a lot, is that you never know what will happen if you actually take that leap of faith. So just for all the listeners out there, take a little over 2 years ago, I didn't have a podcast. I had 0 episodes. I had no guests. I had nothing. And I had wanted to start a podcast for 2 years. And I was fearful. It was the fear of what would happen? What would people think? And it took me a while. And that's why it's called Just Get Started, because I want to hopefully motivate and inspire people to say, hey, you just got to, the first step is generally the hardest. But now we look back and I'm over 80 episodes. The amount of connections that I've made and the opportunities that have allowed me has been phenomenal. You and I wouldn't have met, right? Most likely. So I look at that and say, well, if I didn't take that first leap, and really go through. I mean, it was, trust me, the first several months were difficult, right? Time management, figuring out, prioritizing, recording the episodes, figuring out how to do all that. But once I kind of got in a groove and realized, hey, this is something I'm passionate about, I really do enjoy it, it was easy sailing from there. So I think you got to take that first step and prioritize what's important in your life at the time. And that's going to change, right? Every 6 months, a year, maybe, reprioritize, look at that list, and it may change for you. Hopefully that means you're checking things off the list and then ultimately moving forward.
Yeah. And I think that one of the vital things that you said in that whole, in that was about just taking small steps. And I think that that's where the real key is. It's about not thinking it on a really big level, but actually going, well, what little inspired action can I take today that will move me forward? So it doesn't mean that you have to quit the job that you're in or anything like that. It might just be, like you said, not watching Netflix as much that night and start doing something that might lead to more fulfillment in your life. And that can go for your health-related goals, for your career-related goals, for your relationship-related goals, for your self-love, your time, everything that actually contributes to your own personal well-being and professional well-being. It's just about taking those little micro steps forward. And yeah, it seems like, oh my God, that could take forever, but ultimately it's certainly not as long as if you don't start at all. So I think that's a really key point about taking those really small steps forward. And the other key point I think that you said, which was really, really important for people to understand, is that not every choice that you make that has an incredible ripple effect to opportunity is about income-driven stuff. So, for example, podcasting isn't necessarily direct income driven. I mean, unless you've got a big sponsor or something like that, it's not something which you're getting paid to either run or do an episode with someone else. But the connection, the fulfillment, the joy, if it's something that you love doing, and this is just one example, but whatever it is, it doesn't have to be something that is going to pay that bill right now. It will lead, possibly, once you get to that state of joy and get to that state of fulfillment, then your other choices become better. And you make better choices as you go on, and things seem to feel more aligned to what we talked about in the beginning, your actualized self. And when that happens, the opportunities really open up. So yeah, I think that those 2 points are really good points to just.
Well, and one thing to add on there, and this is just interesting. I think how humans, like our psychology, because you made a good point, is like, yeah, it's hard, right? We're looking forward and gosh, it might take a long time. But like, I think you brought up like finances or someone that's in a lot of debt. Well, how long did it take you to get into debt? We never have that discussion with ourselves. We never look in the mirror and say, well, gosh, man, it took me 5 years. I had zero debt 5 years ago. Now I have, X amount of dollars. Well, how long did it take you to get into debt? Let's just use that as the barometer of like, okay, well, that's maybe how long it takes to get out, or it could take less if I really work hard at it. Right. So it's also too, like, really about looking at your lifestyle.
Yeah.
And understanding that, so a lot of people get in debt because they buy things and they put it on credit where they can't technically afford it because they don't have the means, meaning they don't bring in that revenue or that salary. But yet they live above their means most of the time. So they're kind of living paycheck to paycheck, whatever. Again, the thing that I've learned over the years is almost live like so I use the example, like if I was making $50,000 and then over a few year period, I start making 100,000. Well, I need to still kind of live like that 50,000 a year salary. Well, what's going to happen? Well, I'm going to have a lot of money that I can pay toward debt or put away to stow away, really to kind of have that, financial freedom that I want. But most people, it's the opposite, right? Is they might not make 50, but they live like 100 and they're buying all this stuff. Well, of course you're in debt. So you just got to have that tough talk with yourself of like, what do you really want in life? Do you want the financial freedom? Do you want the opportunity to just kind of pick up and go where you want? Or maybe it is doing some side hustle. You might love your career. I have no problem with that. But you may want to do something else or try something or whatever, or just want to sit and relax. So that's fine as well. But what choices are you making to make that where it's stress-free, where you can put your head down at night? Man, I had a lot of years. I talked before about a lot of debt. Man, one of the things, like, I could not sleep at night because I was in so much debt. And like, I was wondering when I was going to make my next pay, what my next paycheck was going to like, hopefully get me even to be able to pay the bills and stuff. Like, and I know a lot of people go through that. That's tough. That really is. And I can at least assure people there is a light at the end of the tunnel if you put the time in on it, but you really have to have that tough talk first with yourself and say, this is important for me. I'm going to take that step. And then you just got to grind through it. And yeah, it may take a year, it may take 3, it may take 5. I don't know. Everyone's in a different situation, but you got to take that first step to realize that this is what I want to do. And ultimately that could lead you to really the right path.
Yeah. And I think that something which came to mind when you were speaking then as well is about this fact when you said, what gets someone into that debt. And it doesn't have to be debt, that's just an example, but what gets someone into decisions that that feel stressful. So what gets someone to a point when they're feeling really stressed, really feeling really overwhelmed in their life? I mean, you don't just get to that. You've made a lot of choices on the way to get you to that position. And I think it really goes back to what we talked about right at the beginning, and that was the idea of self-awareness. And we talked about it in self-awareness, I suppose, a little bit more in that positive light of being aware of, of who we are and the curiosity and what made us tick as a child and stuff like that. And obviously you said the negative of your family and where you sat in that component for some of your decisions. But if you make decisions that are leading you that have led you to a relatively stressful life, how about the idea of really getting self-aware enough to look at the deeper reasons to why you made some of those decisions, why you made some of those decisions that ended you in a bad financial position, why you made some of the decisions that ended you in a job that you hate, why you made decisions to be with a certain partner that isn't a person that makes you happy. Why did you make the decision to have friends around you that aren't really like-minded? And a lot of those things, when you really dig deep behind that, there's so many more layers that get someone to making bad decisions, like approval addiction, like people pleasing, like that lack of self, that comes from all that lack of self-worth, or trying to gain connection or attention, or, for all those different reasons. And I think that what's really important is that it's not just looked at as a surface issue. When people make bad choices or bad decisions, there's generally a lot of underlying patterns and beliefs and conditioning that's occurred for those decisions to be made. So it's like you, who, when you got to that point, you decided to go down that path of really uncovering and exploring an exploration of self to really realize, one, what is your stuff that you love doing and makes you fulfilled, but what has led you to the other things. And I think that work and that self-work is just paramount to being able to live a sustainable, successful, fulfilled life.
Mm. Yeah, it goes back to what we were talking about, like childhood. I'm such a believer in that argument, the nature versus nurture, right? And I really believe like how I was raised and a lot of the things I went through have had both a positive and negative effect on my life. It's funny you mentioned the finances, right? I know we're talking about debt a little bit. Again, it could be anything, but I used to see my dad like spend money like wild, right? Like live above his means and he had a good job, but like live above his means, always be buying stuff, whatever. And so I thought when I was, which I can't believe companies do this, but I mean, I guess I know why they do this, but like I got a credit card that showed up when I was at college. I was 19 years old. I said, "Oh, credit card. Oh, okay. This is, I've seen my dad use these. I just use a credit card and just pay it back later." Right. And how much debt I told you, like it happened and I didn't, but that's because I was conditioned early on, like, oh, it's not a big deal. Like you pay it back, like everyone's in debt. Like that condition, was what I was brought up with. And that's ultimately, it took a long time for me to really uncover and unpack that. And now I realized that back in probably 08, 09. And that helped me kind of go forward to ultimately be debt free and stuff like that a few years ago. But that was a long road and it was not an easy road. But then I look at the positives too. Like I had such a great set of grandparents. I was so lucky. Like and they all like different in their own way. But I tell this story a lot. Like my grandmother, she just passed away this past year. She was 93. Like she was like my everything, Nana Rowe. And, I remember as we were kids, and I used to do so much stuff with her. She watched us all the time. That's actually where I got my love of interviewing. I used to watch Regis and Kathy Lee. A lot of people know Regis Philbin. Like they used to have that. I think it's now like whatever, Kelly Ripa, and I think Ryan Seacrest are doing it over here. But anyways, like Regis and Kathy Lee, I used to watch growing up, like an interview show with her and anything. But I used to always remember, I don't know why I have this vivid memory of like always going and eating dinner at her house. Like maybe it's on a weekend day or whatever. And she would cook food for us. And we're sitting down, just scrounging the food and eating, right? Me, my brother, whatever, my family. And she's sitting back there, like cleaning the dishes. And then I would see her like an hour later, like sitting in a corner, like shoving food in her mouth, like trying to eat at the end. And it always reminded me of that servant leadership. Like she always wanted to make sure that her family ate first, like they were happy, they were whatever. And she kind of did not care about, like, it was just, she's just the most amazing woman ever. And I learned so many, like my dad's father, he was very involved in like the church and used to always give back and used to just do so many great, nice things. Like, and I learned that. And I think that's partly why, I feel like I'm a very kind person. I like to give back. I like to help because I was around those impactful individuals growing up. So I think it's both positive and negative things of like going back to that self-awareness of like, hey, what are some things that were really positive, but where are you lacking as well? And let's really hone those in to ultimately learn from them and ultimately make, again, the life more fulfilled that you want going forward. So I think we all have those stories. We just, for whatever reason, maybe don't think about them as much. But I think I would encourage most people do.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, a big part of my work is really, even when someone comes to me more with business type coaching, it's always going back to address the core personal foundations before addressing any business foundations. And I think that that's a really important thing for most people, because you will get stuck at some point if you haven't addressed some of those real core personal foundations and become really self-aware.
Absolutely. And with the, one of the things, kind of as an actionable item is, and I don't know if you do this with any folks that you coach with or anything, but like, I tell folks that one of the things that got me over the edge for the podcast, after for 2 years saying I'm going to do it and not starting it, and then finally getting over the edge, was I kind of did like more of a visual mindset, I guess I call it, and I did a lot of meditation, but really reflecting on where do I want to be in a few years, and not like a stake in the ground, like I have to be, the CEO of this company, but really like, where do I see my life? What does that look like? And really when I did that, I thought about having more connections, right? Interacting with a different group of people, seeing like not just career, because I didn't really think about that as much, but really seeing that I was more fulfilled and happy. And ultimately that's what kind of led me to say, okay, well, here you go, Brian. You can either not do the podcast and keep going in the same path you're at, but you're going to be complaining a little bit about your job, or not going to be happy that you're working for, for a company and a corporation. And, even though, like I love what I'm doing, software sales and stuff, but, hey, do you want to do stuff on your own down the road? Okay. Well, if you want to do that, then you have to take this leap of faith and kind of get away from the fear that you have and ultimately just get started. Again, that's why the podcast is called that. So having that visual thought and going through that practice really helped me overcome it and say, listen, I got to do this. Then I at least got to try it, or I can't, in 3 or 5 years, I can't look back and say, oh, I should have done it, because I'm going to have a ton of regret. I need to actually go forward and try it. And at least I can say I tried. So I think part of it was having more of a visual, I don't even know what you would call it, but like a visual look of the future, of kind of what I saw it was. And ultimately that led me to really, that was the last piece to get me over that fear of starting the podcast. And now it's allowing me to do a lot of other things as well. So.
Yeah. And there's always a ripple effect, isn't there? So it's always just, again, coming back to just do it, just start with something and the clarity will come. You don't have to have all the clarity before you start, because action brings clarity as well. So, I mean, lots of things.
It's funny.
Sometimes space of not doing anything brings clarity, and then sometimes action brings clarity. So you have to sort of play with it, and not expect that clarity is just something that you click your fingers and all of a sudden you get clear. You've got to do the work, and sometimes that work is being still And sometimes that work is doing action, and sometimes it's really, doing deeper reflection. But you've got to do a combination of all those things, and eventually, and even with conversations, you will gain clarity.
Yeah, and we're talking about a lot of reflection and kind of looking back and stuff. One other thing to mention, and I think this could be helpful for folks, is because we're all, everyone always thinks like, hey, what's that next thing? What am I passionate about? What am I going to do next? I would actually encourage everyone listening to think about things that they were going to do years ago and never did, and maybe circling back on that. So I'll give an example. So I have my first children's book I'm publishing next year. I'm working with an illustrator now. I should part in about right on March 1st is my goal. I wrote that book in 2012. So if you can imagine, that's 7 years ago, I wrote that book. Now I had probably 70% of it done, right? I've tweaked it since then. But because I wasn't in a supportive marriage. I wasn't happy with my career at the time, but I had my son. And the reason I started writing the book is my son was just born. I said, man, this would be cool to like have, I was thinking about, golf, like when him and I are going to get to play our first round of golf together. And so I started to write this book. It's called Luke's First Round of Golf. It's always been the title from day one. But I shelved it for many years. And then finally, earlier this year, I picked it up and I said, you know what? I'm finishing this thing. I'm finishing this because now I have a different confidence level. I believe in myself. Again, we talk about that self-love. Like it doesn't matter what people say, whether they like it or not. It's something that I want to do that's important for me. So I kind of forged forward and said, hey, listen, I'm finishing this book and I'm excited for launch. But that's something too, like it may be something folks have wanted to do in the past. And then for whatever reason, they didn't believe in themselves. They didn't have the support system. They weren't in the right financial state, whatever. Maybe go back and look and say, gosh, let me try that. Or let me take that trip or, let me do that. And maybe it's something that you uncover and you almost can complete, it becomes a completion point where you can check that box and say, you know what, I did finish this. It took me a little longer than I wanted, but I actually finished it. And it's going to be a proud moment. I can't wait to hand that, book to my son because we end up getting to play our first round of golf this year together. And he played 9 holes himself on a par 3 course. So it's pretty funny how, it's kind of circled back. So yeah. I'm excited to hand him that book and read it with him.
Yeah. And I think that's great advice. Sometimes some of those projects that were started before, some of them, the expiry date's gone. And when you look at it, you go, nah, there's no energy in that for me at all. But then there might be other things where all of a sudden you feel a spark and you feel an energy about it. And you don't have to think, well, but it's been this long and I can't pick it up because, there's shame around that and whatever. But maybe it's actually not about anything but the fact that the timing wasn't right then and the timing is right now because now you have the skills and the experience to finish it off in the way that it was supposed to be finished.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah, that's great advice. The other thing that I suppose would be great to talk about, you've mentioned a couple of times is the podcast that you're doing, and that podcast is Just Get Started. And you have done about 80 episodes or so on that podcast. Is that right?
Yeah, just launched episode 81. So whenever this launches, I don't know, but yeah, just launched episode 81 around Thanksgiving here in November 2019.
Episodes, and you've interviewed different people around this idea, like different stories of people just getting started and taking that step and, their stories around that. I mean, that's almost like without going to do your PhD, that's almost like a social science experiment, really, or research. And so in that research, more research than experiment, but more in that research, I suppose, even though it's not, traditional research, there must be some things that have really come out amongst so many different stories that are a common thread for a lot of things, a lot of reasons people get stuck, a lot of tools people use to move forward and to actually just get started. Just common threads that sort of come through within, I suppose, the research that you've been doing by doing 80 episodes of different stories of people just getting started.
Gosh, we can do a whole nother podcast on that probably. I think that I'll say the biggest, to be concise, that has above and beyond been the number one key takeaway is consistency. With almost every interview, it's consistency. So everyone has gone through their challenges, right? Their struggles. They didn't get this money, or they stubbed their toe in this area, or their co-founder left, or I can name a variety of different things. But they believed so much in what they were doing that they persevered and kind of went forward with it because they had that mission that they wanted to drive forward with. So it wasn't kind of some willy-nilly thing like, maybe I'll start it. They actually believed in what they were doing. Do a whole nother podcast on that probably. I think that I'll say the biggest, to be concise, that has above and beyond been the number one key takeaway is consistency. With almost every interview, it's consistency. So everyone has gone through their challenges, right? Their struggles. They didn't get this money, or they stubbed their toe in this area, or their co-founder left, or I can name a variety of different things. But they believed so much in what they were doing that they persevered and kind of went forward with it because they had that mission that they wanted to drive forward with. So it wasn't kind of some willy-nilly thing like, maybe I'll start it. They actually believed in what they were doing. And I have plenty of examples. Like I remember I'm a part of this great group called Next Gen. It's this phenomenal community of entrepreneurs, but and it was started by two guys, but Justin Lafazan was one of my interviewees, guests, I guess, back like episode 32. And he talked about losing $30,000 the first Next Gen summit that they put on. So this is 5 years ago. They lost $30,000. How many people would have done a Next Gen Summit Part 2 if you lose $30,000 year one? But they believe so much that what they saw there was going to grow, and now next year will be year 6 of the summit, the annual summit. They have Ray Dalio, that world principles, to be their keynote speaker. It's a fabulous event. I was there last year with probably almost 1,000 people. So what I'm saying is that I can probably sit here and spit off probably 50 examples, but consistency and keep going through and believing in what you're doing. At the end of the day, it's not easy. Certainly if it was easy, everyone would do it. We always heard that. So continue to go forward each and every day and just continue to do the things, keep tweaking the system, right? Keep doing things that you think are going to work. And then if it doesn't work, tweak it and say, let me try to do something a little different, but still moving forward on that path. I think that's probably the biggest takeaway I've had in all the episodes.
Yeah, that's really good. And I think that is key, consistency. And it's even to the extent that even if it's not in business and it's like, I want to get fit, and you're not doing anything that is allowing you to sort of achieve that goal right now, you can't go and go, all right, well, I'm going to run, start running 5Ks a day. It's not about that. Won't help because you'll fall off that treadmill. But if you started by going every single day for the first week, I'm going to literally just run for 2 minutes. And although those 2 minutes might not necessarily develop you into a good state of fitness, what they do is develop your consistency. And when you start doing consistency, that's when you start seeing results. So yeah, it's so true, whether it's to do with, health related stuff on a physical level, whether it's a mindset thing, a pattern of gratitude practice, it all comes down to those practices, that consistency to keep practicing and practicing. I mean, you look at anything and anybody that's successful, and even take sports, if you want to take golf, and you look at someone who's at the top of their game, what do that gets them to achieve that? They practice. There's no top sporting teams out there that don't practice every day or practice every couple of days. That's what life really is, isn't it? A practice.
Yeah, and listen, at the end of the day, like, you use golf as the example, and a lot of people say, well, people joke like, oh, LeBron James, like, yeah, he was meant to play basketball. Well, that's untrue. I don't think that's true. No one's born to play basketball. Basketball is a sport that was invented, right? So no one's born to play basketball. Yes, did he have the physical attributes to help him? Yes, but he still had to put thousands and thousands and thousands of hours. I know a lot of your fans, right, probably know Jason Day, right, or Greg Norman was one of my favorite players growing up. Greg Norman. I mean, obviously Jason Day's probably one of the more popular ones now over there, but Greg Norman was. I mean, I don't think he started golf until he was 15 years old. but he put just a phenomenal amount of work. Yeah, certainly he had the body type and he had some things that helped him, but that would have never happened if he didn't put the time in. You would never know who he was as a golfer. So he put that time in, he put that effort in, and he believed in himself too. I think part of it comes down to that self-belief, because you're going to go through a lot of trials and tribulations, but you just got to keep kind of going through the storm to get out the other end.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's, out of all the things that we've talked about and all the, the different parts of really like self-awareness to me is the major key. But beyond that, the two biggest, I think, takeaways are probably things like self-belief and consistency for success.
Absolutely.
Or success of whatever success looks like for that person, and everybody sees that differently. And that's all good too. And it doesn't have to be financial success. It can be just success in, in loving yourself. It doesn't really matter. But, just success of whatever you see it as at whatever, part of your life. And it is, just that consistency and that self-belief.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like I said, there's a lot of things there that you just have to have that reflection on yourself and figure out where do you want to go. And for some people, that's, they're happy now and it's a little change. Other people, it's a massive shift. You just got to figure out who you are and what you want. And if you want to have a fulfilling life, maybe some people like to live in negative. They like to complain all day. I don't know. Maybe that makes them happy in a weird way, but I live life positively and kind of the glass half full, if you will. I think that's the only way to live. I think that's it not only makes you better, but it just makes the world a better place and a happier place. So I hope people all find their fulfillment.
Absolutely. And there is definitely a ripple effect of that. But you're right. There are some people that do prefer to live in that negative state. And I suppose in some ways, and not in the long term for, the long-term well-being of the person. But in particular stages, there is a lot of advantages of being and playing the victim, and a lot of people feel those advantages. And so the idea of risking not having the attention placed on them, not having people do stuff for them, not having people almost pity them and what comes with that, feels like almost scary to let go of those things because they've let it define them for so long. And they have developed a belief that is what's kept them going. And so if you take that away, it's like, well, why does anyone is going to hang around me or be around me or do things for me if I don't have this problem?
Yeah, again, absolutely. I can't agree more with that statement.
Yeah. So, and it is then taking that risk, that realizing, well, you want people to be around you for the right reasons and not just out of pity. So,
right.
Yeah, well, there's so much in that again as well. So if we were to wrap up and start, to wind this up, what are some of the things? Obviously, we've got the consistency, the self-belief, the self-awareness, the coming back to, your real personality, your unique self, and, leading from that place. Is there anything else that you want to add?
I mean, gosh, we have a lot there. I would just encourage everyone, be careful the words that you say to yourself. I used to have a lot of negative things in my head, even though I was positive outward and optimistic outward. I was very negative in my head, not thinking I should be successful or will be, or that I could do this, that, or the other. And I really think changing your mindset is that's been the biggest shift for me in all of this is mindset. And I know that gets overplayed a lot nowadays, right? But the reality is that if you consistently, going back to that word, say positive things to yourself and believe in yourself and believe that you can achieve certain things, you absolutely will. And if you don't, you probably won't. And I really think it comes back to that is you have to, don't beat yourself up over everything. Like give some positive affirmation to yourself because you give it to other people. But yeah, for some reason we're negative toward ourselves. We always give compliments out. But then toward ourselves, we're like we're like so bad to ourselves for some reason. We treat ourselves like crap most of the time. like, give yourself some love and
Yeah.
be proud of who you are and where you've been. And because we've all gone through, struggles, whatever it is. And probably most people have gone through more struggles than I have. So use that as fuel and motivation that, hey, you've been through stuff. Let's make it better going forward, and don't just live in that negativity. So
Yeah, that's great advice, and I think that that's really true. A lot of everybody has an inner critic, that person, that mean voice in your head, and I don't think that it necessarily. Well, I think you're really lucky if you get to a point that it goes away forever. But at some point,
mm,
it's not necessarily about um, getting it to disappear. It's about making friends with it,
that's
and
that's a good way to put it. Yeah,
and
that's a good way to put it.
actually talking to it and letting that inner voice know that. I mean, ultimately, that inner voice is just like it's your ego trying to protect you, or that younger version of yourself that was scared, that is feeling like this is a similar situation, even though the context is different, and it's trying to maybe protect you. And it's maybe about having those conversations and making friends with that inner critic to let it know that, you know what, my self as I am today and my age doesn't need your help anymore, and thank you, and thanking it, and being friends with it, and letting it stay, staying around if it wants to, put it in your pocket, I don't know, but but that that you've got this, and that you don't need their help anymore, and that you can move forward and achieve things in a way that you don't have to be scared anymore, because often that inner voice is really
Yeah.
there to, it's really just talking to the fear, isn't it? So
It kind of reminds me of the movie A Beautiful Mind with Russell Crowe.
uh-huh.
I don't know if anyone has ever seen that. It was a great movie
Yeah,
many years ago, but where he's like, he always, sees various things. I can't remember the condition he had off the top of my head, but he kind of suppressed that, and they were always there in the background, but he didn't let it bother him anymore as he figured it out, how to kind of suppress those people, I guess, that he was seeing. So similar to what you're saying, yeah, I think that's a great point. They never go away, but you really have to temper it as best you can.
yeah, and be friends with it. And I think that, yeah, I mean, and do some work on that, like speak to it, ask it what it's saying, and also remember that if you are doing the negative self-talk, which is a little bit similar to the inner critic, but it's also a lot of self-talk, it's like, you sort of mentioned about, well, quieten that voice, and I mean, you'd never talk to your best friend like that, so why are you talking to you, which you're supposed to be your best friend,
Exactly.
like that?
Absolutely.
But it's like everything, and we've sort of talked on it at times in other things within this conversation, but like everything, it's much easier to say don't do that than actually do it. So I'd like to suggest a tool maybe going forward for maybe speaking to yourself more kindly is to do things that might sound a little bit weird, but get one of those Posca pens or whatever, those mirror, those texters, those chalk pens, whatever they're called, that you can write on a mirror with. And
Oh, like a dry erase marker. Yeah.
yeah, like the ones you can write
Yeah.
on a mirror with, like a chalk pen, chalk texter, and write things that are nice, like I am worthy, things like that on the mirror in front of you, or I am amazing, or whatever resonates with each person. And it might sound so simple and so nothing, but if you program yourself to be seeing that every single time you look in the mirror when you're looking at yourself, then that's something so simple to start actually speaking to yourself nicely. Because it's all good and well to say start speaking to yourself nicely, but I think you need to put things in place that allow you to think to yourself nicely better.
Yeah.
Or writing, getting into a habit or practice of writing 3 things, that you did really good today, every single day.
That's a great point. Everyone should do exactly what you just said. I think that's a phenomenal point.
Yeah. Excellent. So thank you so much for your time this morning, and it's been so lovely to chat. And it's interesting you say about podcasting and connecting with people that you otherwise wouldn't connect with, and you're on the other side of the world at the moment, doing some similar but some different things to me, but yet we are all like what's personal is universal, because so many of the things that I've shared, so many things that you've shared align so consistently with the way that we think, or what we value, and the things that we're actually doing and helping people with. And yet we've never had a conversation before. We have very different upbringings. We're in we're in completely different continents. And it just shows that, what is personal is universal. And when you're for anyone who's listening, if you're finding that things are really difficult, and I know it sounds a bit cliche, or you're not the only one going through it, but you're really not. And that's on the positive and the negative, because if you're feeling a certain way, I can guarantee you right now that there's a hell of a lot of other people feeling the same way. So yeah, I think that that's probably a really great place to leave this, that what is personal is universal.
Yeah, Lisa, thanks so much. This is phenomenal. Very grateful for the opportunity to chat with you, meet you, and have this conversation. So thank you very much.
Oh, absolutely. It's been great. Brian and I would love to know what your biggest takeaway is, what your biggest insight is from the conversation today. So if you can just leave a comment and let us know. And if you'd like more information on Brian and what he does, where's a good place that they could find you?
Yeah, probably my website is best, brianondrako.com. Kind of everything is housed there. From the podcast, I have a bunch of blog articles. I just actually wrote this ebook for podcasting called The Bootstrapper's Guide to Podcasting, really for folks like me that had that fear and want some tools or some things to help out with. That's a cool place. So there's some cool information on there, but that's the best place to connect with me. And I mean, I'm all over like social media at Brian Ondrako, most places.
Brilliant. And I'll put all of those details on the show notes below anyway. So if you've enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends and consider subscribing to the Wealthy Living podcast channel or podcast on iTunes, and also Wealthy Living on YouTube. And so therefore, if you do that, you can listen to more conversations with wonderful humans whose stories, knowledge, actionable ideas, and wisdom can help you live a meaningful, connected, and well life, both personally and professionally. I'm Lisa, an integrated life, clarity, and wellbeing coach, a workplace wellbeing consultant, conversation facilitator, and events creator and host. So if you want to find out a bit more about my services, you can go to wealthyliving.com.au. That's WELLTHY living.com.au, or else find me on any of my social media channels. So until next time, remember, connection is medicine.